Hi, I'm Miss Karen from the Bridgeville Public Library. Today for Earth Friends, I'm going to talk a little about pollinators. Pollen is the light powdery substance you might have seen on plants or flowers. If you have allergies, it might be pollen that makes you sneeze when you go outside during the growing season in the spring or summer or fall. But pollen is very important because pollen is what helps to fertilize plants to help things grow, like flowers and fruits and vegetables. Some pollen is light and powdery, and the wind can easily blow it from one flower to another to fertilize them. But some pollen, a lot of pollen actually, is heavy and kind of sticky, and it needs help to get to the other plants to fertilize them. The bugs and animals that help to move the pollen from one plant to another are called pollinators. When you hear the word pollinators, two of the most popular or most well-known pollinators are bees and butterflies. Some other bugs and animals that are also pollinators include moths, flies, wasps. There are birds like hummingbirds, and even bats help to pollinate some plants. Without these pollinators, we wouldn't have the beautiful flowers that we do, and we wouldn't have good food like strawberries and blueberries, tomatoes, zucchini, squash, watermelon, cantaloupe. We wouldn't even have things like chocolate or coffee because those grow from beans that need pollinators to help them grow. Lately, there seems to be a bit of a decline in the number of pollinators. There aren't as many as in previous years, and there could be different reasons for that. Sometimes there might be a disease or parasite that affects the number of pollinators, or if there's a lot of pesticide use that could harm them or the plants they need to live. Maybe the climate where they live has changed, or sometimes their habitat has changed. Maybe there's a field of wildflowers that the pollinators used to use for shelter and for food, and maybe it's not there anymore. A building might have been built on it, or maybe a farmer just planted a different crop there, or a gardener planted something else in their garden that year that doesn't seem to be something that the pollinators like as much. So, as friends of the earth, you might think, well, what can we do to help the pollinators? And there are some different things that we can do. One thing is to plant a pollinator garden. There are a lot of great resources to learn different ideas for pollinator gardens. Two good resources that are online. One is Penn State Extension. They have many great resources and webinars and articles you can find online. Another one is a local greenhouse, Bedner's Greenhouse, which actually just did a program on pollinators that they shared to Facebook this weekend, and you might be able to get some tips from that too. But if you want to plant a pollinator garden, there are some things that you can just do to plant one that will help the pollinators. One thing that is important to remember is to plant native plants. Flowers and trees and plants that naturally grow in an area are designed by nature to be things that the pollinators can use for food and shelter. Another thing is it's a good idea to pick a nice sunny spot to plant your pollinator garden because bees and butterflies, they need it to be warm to be able to fly and to feed properly. And another thing to remember in your pollinator garden is to try to take care of it naturally without using too many pesticides that might injure the pollinators. So what are some plants that the pollinators might like? Well, it's a good idea to have a variety of flowers that are different colors and shapes that bloom at different times so that all through the growing season the pollinators will find a good source of food and shelter. Some butterflies are attracted to bright colors like pink or purple, orange, red, yellow. The native plants, so plants that will grow naturally in your area, grow, and they have naturally the colors that attract the pollinators. They have the pollen that the bees might need to take back to the hive. And they also have nectar that the pollinators can feed on, so they're just designed to attract the pollinators to your area. Some flowers that butterflies are attracted to include purple cone flowers, black-eyed Susans, geraniums, marigolds and zinnias, sedum, lilacs, snapdragons, and a plant called a butterfly bush. Bees like some of those, and they also like things like pansies and peonies, lavender, and bee balm. There are also some trees that the pollinators might be a little more attracted to, like dogwood or black cherry trees. One plant that you might have heard of that you might associate with butterflies is milkweed. Milkweed is a plant that monarch butterflies in particular attracts them to their habitat. And milkweed is popular because before a butterfly becomes a butterfly, what is it? A caterpillar, right? And the caterpillars that turn into the monarch butterflies feed on the milkweed. So if you plant milkweed, you might just attract some monarch butterflies. You'll have to try it and see. But one good tip I saw is if you do plant milkweed, it's a good idea to plant it towards the back of your garden, because it's not necessarily a showy, pretty plant that will look good in your garden the whole season, because the caterpillars that turn into the monarch butterflies love it so much they will eat it, which is what you want. So another thing that's kind of fun to do if you have a pollinator garden, or you want to attract pollinators, is to make a bee bath. And this isn't really a bath for bees, because bees actually don't like to get wet. They can't fly if they're wet. So a bee bath is something you can make to help give the bees another source of fresh water. And an easy way to make a bee bath is you take a little pot, you need a base. So you take a little pot like a flower pot turned upside down, and that way it lifts the bee bath up off the ground a little bit. So you'd use that for the base, and then you need a little dish. You can use a ceramic dish, maybe an old one that isn't used anymore, or I got a saucer that you might put underneath a flower pot, and you can use that. It can be shallow, it doesn't need to be too deep, because you want the bees to be able to drink the water without getting wet. So you can use natural materials, or you can make it into a craft project. I did paint my the bowl, the little saucer, for my bee bath blue. You can decorate it any way you'd like. And after you have your dish or your saucer, then what you need is to get some rocks or some gems to put into your bee bath. You can pick some rocks from your garden, or if you're making it into a craft project, you can get some different gems from the dollar store or Walmart. So you're going to put your rocks or your gems into your dish and just spread them out evenly. And the reason you want the rocks or the gems for your bee bath is because that's where the bees will walk on or kind of rest on when they're going for their drink of water. That way they can just kind of sit on the little rocks without getting wet, so they can safely get a drink of water. After you have your gems or rocks in your bee bath, then you're going to add some water. And you want to add it just so the rocks or the gems are still sticking out of the water. Like I said, the bees need some place to sit or stand, or just to sit on to bask in the sun. So how much water you're going to use will be determined by how deep your dish is and how big the rocks or gems are. You want the rocks and gems to be out of the water, but maybe submerged a little bit, not all the way, but in the water, so that the bees can step on them and then still safely get a drink. So after you do that, you can go ahead and put it in your pollinator garden and watch to see what pollinators it might attract. I hope that you are all doing well and that you enjoyed learning a little bit about pollinators today, and that you have fun planting your own pollinator garden. There are also some great books about pollinators, and we're going to share a few of those with you next.